If you lived in Colonial Times, pages 60 to 66. How did two men travel when they had only one horse? Suppose there were two men and one horse. One man was William and the other was John. They wanted to get to the next town, but the horse was not strong enough to carry William and John at the same time. How did they travel without riding the horse together? The men started out at the same time. William rode the horse while John walked. William rode for a few miles, then he got off and walked. He left the horse tied to a tree. John came along. He got on the horse and rode past walking William. After a few miles, John got off the horse and tied it to a tree. John and William took turns walking. They took turns riding and tying the horse. This way of traveling was called ride and tie. John did not get tired, neither did William, neither did the horse. How did people get the news? Most towns had a town crier. His job was to walk through the streets and call out the news of the day. If the town crier had special news to tell, he rang a bell or banged on a drum, when people ran to hear what he was saying. Another way to hear the news was to go to the village inn. Travelers from other colonies told what was going on in their towns. There were only a few newspapers in early colonial days. The papers printed news of the 13 colonies. There were news about what ships were sailing and what cargo the ships carried. The papers also had poems, sermons, and advertisements. How would you write a letter in colonial days? Suppose your father was away from home and you wanted to write to him. How would you begin your letter? You would never write, "Dear Dad." That wouldn't be polite. You would say, "Dear Sir," or "Honored Sir." You would end the letter this way: "I am with greatest respect, dear father, your dutiful son or your dutiful daughter." What would you use for a pen and ink and envelope? You would write with a goose feather or feather from a wild turkey. This was called a quill pen. Maple bark boiled in water made good ink. To dry the ink, you would sprinkle sand over the page. There were no envelopes, so you would fold the letter. You would seal the folds with a blob of hot sealing wax. Houses and streets had no numbers, so you might write the address like this: to Mr. William Bradgood, near the White Horse Inn in Cow Street, Boston. How would you send your letter? Suppose you wanted to send your letter to someone in another colony. You would have to pay a man to deliver it. There was no regular mail service in early colonial days. How long did it take to deliver a letter? Sometimes it took the man a month to deliver a letter. In the wintertime, the roads were bad. Then it took 2 months. Sometimes the letter was never delivered. The man you hired might be killed by some Indians, or his bag might fall into the river. That would be the end of your letter. Sometimes it was easier and faster to send a letter to England than to send a letter to another colony. Sailing ships carried the mail to England in about 4 weeks. When did the mail service get better? The first regular mail service began in 1672, 52 years after the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth Rock. The mail was carried by men on horseback. The men were called post riders. The post rider rode with the mail through forests, along narrow Indian trails, and across streams. He kept his gun loaded. There might be a hungry bear or a wolf nearby, or an unfriendly Indian. When the towns grew bigger, the roads became better. Then the mail was delivered by stage wagon. Travelers rode in the stage wagon too. When the wagon came to a big hill, the stage driver made all the passengers get out. They had to help push the wagon up the hill. This is the end of today's lesson.